Welcome back to the deep dive. So our mission today, as always, is to take all that source material you sent over, the papers, the notes, and really pull out the core insights. And today, we're tackling something pretty cutting edge, the new frontiers in cryptography.
Yeah.
We're going way beyond just, hiding a message. We're looking at how we handle complex collaboration, how we manage secrets in a world that's just constantly connected.
That's a really good way to frame it. I mean, for a long time, cryptography was mostly about confidentiality, right? Just making sure only the right person could read something, usually with one key. But like you said, things have shifted. The sources really point this out. We're not just hiding data anymore. We're figuring out how to actually do things with secret data, functionality. And the big challenge now is balancing that functionality, that collaboration, with keeping everything confidential. How do you use data without actually revealing it?
Yeah, that idea of functionality on secrets, that feels like the big aha moment we're aiming for here. We want to understand the clever math behind it all, the tools, the primitives, as the sources call them, that let different people work together or prove something about their combined data without anyone having to show their hand, basically. It's like, imagine 3 rival banks needing to know their total combined assets, but none of them want to reveal their own balance sheet to the others. If you can do that calculation securely, that changes everything for collaboration.
It absolutely does. But okay, before we jump into those advanced techniques, we should probably touch on the foundations, like the source material does. So a crypto system isn't just the algorithm itself. It's defined as the algorithm plus everything it works with, all the possible plain texts, all the ciphertexts, and crucially, all the keys. It's the whole environment.
Right, the whole ecosystem. And looking at that, the sources break it down based on keys into 2 main types, symmetric and public key. A symmetric is, symmetrical, also called conventional or secret key. The key you use to encrypt is the same as the key to decrypt. Or, if they're different, one's super easy to figure out from the other. It's like a shared secret password, basically.
Exactly. And that shared secret aspect is critical because the entire security of a symmetric system hangs on keeping that one key secret. If that key gets out, everything falls apart. All the communication, past, present, future, totally compromised. It has to stay secret. The upside is they're usually very fast. The downside is you need some secure way to share that key in the first place.
Okay, then you have public key systems. Totally different approach. 2 keys, mathematically linked, but, distinct. The source material had that diagram, figure 1.3, showing this. One key is public. Anyone can use it to encrypt a message for you. The other is private, only you have it, and you use it to decrypt.
And that solves the big key distribution problem that symmetric keys have. Anyone can grab your public key and send you a secure message, even if you've never met.
Okay, so that's the high level. But let's dig into how symmetric keys work in practice, specifically modes of operation. The sources talk about cipher block chaining CBC mode. One of the originals, standardized way back with DES. Still important, but it has its quirks.
It does. CBC was designed to fix a pretty major problem with earlier ways of using block ciphers. See, if you just encrypted identical blocks of plain text, you'd get identical blocks of ciphertext. Attackers could spot patterns. Not good.
Right, you could see repetitions even if you couldn't read the message. So how does CBC hide those patterns?
It uses chaining. Hence the name. It's actually quite elegant. Before encrypting the current block of plaintext, you take the previous block of ciphertext and you XOR it with the current plaintext block. Then you encrypt that combined result.
XOR, that's the exclusive OR operation, right? Bitwise comparison.
Exactly. So because the input to the encryption always includes the output of the last encryption, it mixes everything up. Even if you encrypt the same word, like secret, over and over, the ciphertext will look completely different each time because the preceding ciphertext block will be different. It breaks up those patterns beautifully.
But you mentioned quirks. This chaining introduces something that the sources call error extension, which sounds bad. It ties the math directly to things going wrong in the real world, like noise on a connection. How does that work if one bit gets flipped in the ciphertext?
Okay, yeah, let's walk through that. Imagine a single bit error happens during transmission. Maybe some static on the line flips a 0 to a 1 in 1 ciphertext block. When the receiver gets that corrupted block and tries to decrypt it, the result is complete garbage. The entire block is scrambled because that one wrong bit throws off the whole decryption for that block. That's the first hit.
Okay, so one block is toast. What about the extension part? Does it mess up everything after it too?
This is where the chaining effect comes back, but in a specific way. That garbled ciphertext block, It gets used in the decryption of the next block, right? Because
Yeah.
it's XOR'd with the ciphertext of that next block before decryption. So the error does propagate. But because of how XOR works, when that garbled block is used, it only introduces a predictable single-bit error into the plaintext of that following block.
Wait, hang on. The first block is totally garbled, like unrecoverable,
Uh-huh.
but the block after it only gets a single incorrect bit. That seems surprisingly controlled.
It is. It's actually a key feature, even though it sounds like a flaw initially. The error extension is limited. That first block is gone. The second block has exactly one wrong bit. But crucially, every block after that decrypts perfectly fine. The error doesn't keep propagating indefinitely. CBC mode is self-recovering or self-synchronizing.
So despite the initial garbling of two blocks, one totally, one partially, the system gets back on track by itself. That's actually pretty useful if you're dealing with noisy channels where bit errors happen.
Precisely. It's an operational annoyance for sure, having those two blocks messed up, but the communication doesn't completely break down from a single transient error.
Okay, that's a fascinating deep dive into the mechanics. Now let's switch back to public key systems. You'd think systems based on, complex math like number theory would be pretty robust against simple attacks. But the sources mention they can be vulnerable to things like chosen plaintext attacks or CPAs, especially if the range of possible messages is small. Why are they more fragile here than symmetric systems?
Well, symmetric algorithms often have very complex internal structures, lots of rounds, mixing things up thoroughly. It's hard to learn anything useful just by feeding them chosen inputs and seeing the outputs, especially with the huge key space. Public key systems, though, rely on specific mathematical structures like factoring large numbers or discrete logarithms. If the possible inputs, the plaintexts, are very limited, say the message can only be approve or deny, or maybe one of 10 product codes, an attacker can just take the public key, encrypt all the possibilities themselves, and then compare those results to the ciphertext they intercepted. If they find a match, they know the plaintext.
So they can basically build a dictionary because the number of possible messages is tiny.
Exactly. It bypasses the difficulty of the underlying math problem because the message space is too small.
Okay, that makes sense. Which leads us to probably the most famous attack against public key systems, one that ignores the math completely. The man-in-the-middle attack. MiTM. This isn't about breaking the encryption, it's about tricking people about who they're talking to, right? It attacks the trust.
Precisely. It exploits the key exchange process. Let's use the classic Alice, Bob, and the attacker, Mallory. Alice wants to send her public key to Bob so he can message her securely. Mallory intercepts that transmission. Instead of forwarding Alice's key, Mallory sends Bob his own, Mallory's public key, but claims it's Alice's. Then, when Bob sends his public key back to Alice, Mallory intercepts that too and substitutes his own public key again, claiming it's Bob's.
Okay, so Alice has Mallory's key, thinking it's Bob's.
Yeah.
And Bob has Mallory's key, thinking it's Alice's. Neither knows the other's real key, and neither knows Mallory is involved.
Correct. Now, when Alice wants to send a message to Bob, she encrypts it using the key she thinks belongs to Bob, which is actually Mallory's public key. Mallory intercepts the message. Since he has the corresponding private key, he decrypts it, reads it, maybe even changes it. Then he re-encrypts the message, original or modified, using Bob's actual public key, which he intercepted earlier, and sends it on to Bob. Bob receives it, decrypts it with his private key, and thinks he got a secure message straight from Alice.
And the same happens in reverse for Bob's messages to Alice. Mallory sits in the middle, reading and potentially altering everything, completely invisible to both Alice and Bob.
Exactly. He's like an invisible relay station with full access.
But, this sounds like a fundamental flaw. How do we actually prevent this in the real world? The sources must touch on countermeasures, right? It can't just be, well, don't get intercepted.
Right, absolutely. This is where we move beyond just the algorithms and into infrastructure. The main defense is public key infrastructure, or PKI. The core idea is using digital certificates. Instead of just exchanging raw public keys, Alice and Bob exchange certificates. These certificates are issued by a trusted third party called a certificate authority, or CA. Think of companies like VeriSign or Let's Encrypt. The CA verifies Alice's identity, then creates a digital certificate that cryptographically binds her identity information to her public key. The CA then digitally signs this certificate using its own private key.
Okay, so it's like a digital passport issued by a trusted authority, vouching that this public key really belongs to Alice.
Precisely. Now, when Alice sends her certificate to Bob, Bob's system can check the CA's digital signature on it. Bob's system already trusts the CA. It has the CA's public key. If the signature is valid, Bob knows the certificate hasn't been tampered with, and that the key inside really belongs to the entity named in the certificate, Alice. If Mallory tries to substitute his own key or certificate, it either won't be signed by a trusted CA, or the identity information won't match Alice. Bob's system will flag it as suspicious or invalid, stopping the MiTM attack before it starts.
So PKI builds that layer of trust verification on top of the public key math. You need both for it to work securely in practice.
Exactly. The math can be perfect, but without reliable identity verification, it's vulnerable.
Okay, that foundation is clear. Now let's get back to that cutting edge, the advanced concepts. If basic crypto has issues with identity and key exchange, these advanced methods are trying to solve an even harder problem: collaboration without revealing identity or raw data in the first place. This is where we get into multi-party concepts. The goal is like sharing insights from data without sharing the data itself.
Yes, and the formal term for this field, as the sources point out, is Secure Multi-Party Computation, or MPC. The sources identify it as a specific category of algorithm, and its objective is, frankly, revolutionary. It aims to let several different parties jointly compute some function based on their private inputs, but in such a way that none of them learn anything about the other party's inputs beyond what can be inferred from the final output itself.
Okay, give us a practical example, like the bank one earlier.
That's a good one. Or think about medical research. Multiple hospitals might have patient data. They want to run a statistical analysis across all their data combined to find, say, correlations between a treatment and outcomes. But privacy laws, IPA for instance, prevent them from just pooling all that raw patient data. With MPC, they could potentially run the analysis on the combined data set without any hospital ever seeing the individual patient records from the other hospitals. The computation happens on encrypted or specially shared data.
That sounds incredibly powerful. But also computationally expensive.
Yeah.
Is this stuff actually practical right now for like large companies?
That's the main hurdle, yes. MPC protocols can be computationally intensive, much slower than just computing on plain text. Performance is a major area of research and development. But the potential payoff is so huge that there's massive interest. Think about financial institutions wanting to pool data to detect complex fraud rings that operate across multiple banks. MPC could let them spot those patterns without sharing sensitive customer transaction details with competitors. It enables collaboration that was simply impossible before while maintaining confidentiality.
Okay, so how does this magic work, even conceptually? The sources give a really simple example, primitive to illustrate the idea: splitting a message using XOR. They describe it as a basic secret sharing scheme, easily extendable. Let's break that down.
Yeah, it's a great illustration of the core security principle. Let's stick with the example. Trent wants to share a secret message, M, among 4 people: Alice, Bob, Carol, and Dave. But he doesn't want any one of them to know M.
Okay, so Trent is the dealer holding the secret M. What's step 1?
Randomness. Trent needs to generate 3 independent, truly random bit strings. Let's call them R, S, and T. Critically, R, S, and T must each be exactly the same length as the message M, and their randomness is key. They have to be unpredictable.
Got it. 3 random masks, same size as the message. Step 2.
Trent computes the 4th piece, let's call it U. He calculates U by taking the original message M and XORing it with R, then XORing that with S, then XORing that with T. So mathematically, U, M, R, S, T.
Right. The message M is now mixed together with those 3 random strings using XOR.
Yeah.
U is the result. What's step 3?
Distribution. Trent gives 1 piece to each person. Alice gets R. Bob gets S, Carol gets T, and Dave gets U. Now think about what Alice knows. She just has R. Since R is perfectly random and the same length as M, it gives her absolutely zero information about M itself. M could be anything, and R would still look like random noise. The same is true for Bob with S, Carol with T, and Dave with U.
So individually, each share is useless. It's just random bits. The information is perfectly hidden among them. That's the secret sharing part.
Exactly. No single person learns anything. But, and this is step 4, reconstruction requires cooperation.
How do they put it back together?
If Alice, Bob, Carol, and Dave all get together, they just need to XOR their pieces, R-S-T-U. Now remember how U was defined. U is M-R-S-A-T, so when they compute R-S-A-S-C-T, M-R-S-A-A.
Ah, the XOR operation cancels itself out. R XOR R is 0, S XOR R S is 0, T XOR T is 0.
Precisely. All the random strings just vanish. What's left is just M, the original secret message. It's perfectly reconstructed.
Wow. Okay, that's simple but really clever. And it shows that you need all 4 of them to cooperate to get the secret back. If only 3 get together, they still can't figure out M because one piece of the randomness is missing.
Exactly. It demonstrates both secret sharing and distributed trust. This basic XOR scheme is what's called an NN threshold scheme. You need all N participants, in this case 4, to reconstruct the secret. This simple idea is the foundation for more complex schemes. The sources also mention related concepts like general secret sharing algorithms.
Yeah, what are those, like variations on this?
Kind of. More advanced schemes, often based on polynomials, allow for different thresholds. For example, you could design a KN scheme where you distribute N shares, but any K out of those N people, where K is less than N, can get together and reconstruct the secret. This adds fault tolerance. If you need 3 out of 5 people, it doesn't matter if 2 are unavailable, the secret can still be recovered.
Okay, that makes sense for reliability. The sources also mention Oblivious Transfer. That sounds mysterious. What's that about?
Oblivious Transfer, or OT, is another really fundamental building block for many MPC protocols. It's a bit mind-bending at first. Imagine a sender has 2 messages, let's say message A and message B. A receiver wants to get one of them, say message B, but doesn't want the sender to know which one they chose, A or B. And crucially, the receiver should only learn the message they chose, B in this case, and gain absolutely no information about the other message, A.
Okay, let me see if I got that. Sender has A and B, receiver wants B, receiver gets B. Sender doesn't know if receiver picked A or B, receiver learns nothing about A.
That's it, exactly. The sender remains oblivious to the receiver's choice. And the receiver only gets what they asked for. It seems simple, but OT is surprisingly powerful. You can build incredibly complex, secure computations on top of it. Things like comparing 2 private numbers to see which is bigger without revealing the numbers themselves. Checking if an element held by one party is present in a set held by another party without revealing the element or the set. Private set intersection. Running secure auctions where bids remain private until the winner is determined.
Wow. Okay, so these primitives, secret sharing, oblivious transfer, they're like the cryptographic Lego bricks for building these really complex, secure, collaborative systems.
That's a great analogy. They provide the guarantees needed to perform computations while keeping the underlying data confidential.
All right, let's shift from the theory and primitives to how this stuff actually gets used, deployed in the real world. Because deployment choices have huge security implications. The sources contrast 2 main ways encryption gets applied in networks, link by link versus end-to-end.
Right, and where you apply the encryption fundamentally changes what you're protecting against and who you need to trust. Link by link is like encrypting data only for one hop of its journey at a time. Your computer encrypts it to send to the first router. That router decrypts it, reads the destination, maybe does something else, then re-encrypts it to send to the next router, and so on.
So the message is actually in plain text, totally exposed, inside each intermediate node, each router, each switch along the path.
Potentially, yes. It's decrypted at each link in the chain to allow the network device to do its job, like routing. The security is focused on securing the connection between nodes, not the data within the nodes. This is often handled by the network infrastructure itself. Sometimes in hardware, it can be simpler to manage and kind of invisible to the end user.
But the big downside is trust. You have to trust every single node along the path, not to snoop on or tamper with your data while it's decrypted there.
Exactly. Any compromised router or any administrator with access to those intermediate devices could potentially access the plaintext data.
Okay, so what's the alternative? End-to-end encryption.
End-to-end aims to fix that vulnerability. With E2EE, the message is encrypted by the sender's device, like your phone or computer, and it stays encrypted all the way across the network through all the routers, servers, switches, until it reaches the final recipient's device where it's finally decrypted.
So those intermediate nodes just see encrypted gibberish. They could forward it based on addressing information that might be outside the encrypted part, but they can't read the actual content.
Correct. The encryption protects the data for its entire journey, from the origin endpoint to the destination endpoint. This puts the security control firmly in the hands of the users at the ends. You don't have to trust the intermediate network providers as much.
But I guess the challenge there is making it work seamlessly. The user often has to be involved, maybe using specific apps like Signal or WhatsApp that implement E2E. It's not always automatic network level stuff.
That's the trade-off. Link by link can be easier to deploy across an organization's internal network, often transparently. End-to-end provides much stronger privacy guarantees, especially over the public internet, but might require more user awareness or specific application support.
Okay, makes sense. Now, whether it's link or end-to-end, we know security relies on the keys, and keys need to be random, unpredictable. The sources really emphasize a shift here, moving away from people trying to invent their own ways to generate random numbers, which often ended badly.
Oh yeah, that was a huge problem historically. Developers would use things like the system clock or process IDs or simple mathematical formulas. These are often predictable, or at least not truly random. An attacker could potentially guess the random numbers and thus the keys. The standard practice now, the absolute requirement, is to rely on the cryptographically secure pseudo-random number generators, CSPRNGs, built into modern operating systems and programming language libraries. These are designed specifically for security needs.
The source material gives an example. Tiny PRNG. It sounds like a well-designed system. What makes it cryptographically strong?
It's built on solid principles. According to the source, its core mechanism uses the AES encryption algorithm running in counter mode, AES-CTR, to generate the random output stream. So you're essentially deriving your randomness from the presumed security of AES itself, which is a very well-vetted international standard block cipher. If AES is secure, the output should look random.
Okay, using a strong cipher for the output. What else? It mentions protecting against state compromise using an entropy infrastructure. What does that mean?
Right, that's the other crucial part. A PRNG has an internal state, basically, the seed value it's currently working from. If an attacker could somehow learn that internal state, they could predict all future random numbers until the state changes. To prevent this, or at least recover from it, good CSPRNGs continuously gather entropy. Entropy is a measure of real-world unpredictability or randomness. The entropy infrastructure is the part of the system that collects tiny, unpredictable physical events. Timings between keystrokes, mouse movements, variations in disk drive read-write times, network packet arrival jitter, maybe even electrical noise from hardware components.
So it's constantly feeding real-world chaos into the generator.
Exactly. Tiny PRNG periodically takes this collected entropy and uses it to stir up or completely refresh its internal state. This means even if an attacker somehow managed to figure out the generator state at one point in time, which is already very hard, that state is going to be changed soon by new unpredictable entropy, making the compromise temporary and limiting the damage. Future outputs remain secure.
That makes sense. Constant reseeding with true randomness. Okay, let's connect this tech to policy. The sources raise a really interesting point about data privacy regulation. They say corporations and governments often push to regulate how data is used, rather than regulating the collection of data itself. Why is that distinction so important?
It's a fundamental difference in approach with huge consequences for privacy. If you only regulate use, it implicitly allows entities to collect vast amounts of data, often speculatively. Companies argue they need to collect everything now because they might find a valuable use for it later, or regulators might allow a certain use in the future. It preserves their options.
But the sources argue the harm starts at collection, right? Not just when the data is misused.
That's the core argument for stricter collection limits. Once data is collected, it exists. It's potentially vulnerable forever. It can be exposed in data breaches. It can be sold or shared when companies merge or change policies. It can be accessed by governments through legal demands, which might change over time. Its original context can be lost. Focusing only on use ignores the inherent risk created by the mere existence and aggregation of massive data sets. Unrestricted collection enables this gradual erosion of privacy because even if the intended use today is okay, the data remains available for other uses or misuses tomorrow.
So it's about limiting the raw material for potential future harm, not just policing the current actions.
Exactly. It's a tension between corporate desire for future data options and the individual's need to minimize their data footprint and systemic risk exposure.
Okay, let's bring this down to a specific complex system example. The smart grid. The sources talk about systems like AMI, advanced metering infrastructure, the smart meters themselves, and MDMS, meter data management systems, that collect and process the data. These systems handle sensitive consumer info, like billing details.
Yes, and the risk goes beyond just someone stealing your billing address. The energy consumption data itself, gathered by the AMI, is incredibly revealing. The sources highlight this data aggregation risk. By analyzing your detailed power usage patterns minute by minute, hour by hour, someone can infer a lot about your life.
Like what kind of things?
Oh, all sorts. When you typically wake up and go to sleep. When you leave the house for work and when you come back. Whether you're home on a particular evening or away on vacation, you can potentially identify the signatures of major appliances turning on and off, dishwasher, washing machine, air conditioning, maybe even detect the continuous low power draw of certain medical equipment. Over time, this builds a very detailed profile of household occupancy and behavior. It's far more invasive than just knowing how many kilowatt hours you used last month.
Wow. So data that seems purely operational energy usage becomes a rich source of personal surveillance information when analyzed closely.
Precisely. That's the aggregation risk. So mitigation can't just be about securing the billing database. It needs an architectural approach.
What do the sources suggest?
They propose strategies like isolating or, even better, fully disassociating the most sensitive personal and financial data from the main operational data streams coming from the meters, AMI, and processed by the MDMS. Basically, make the operational systems, which might need to be more accessible, less attractive targets, by removing the crown jewels, the direct PII and billing info. Encrypt sensitive data robustly, limit who can access it, maybe store it in a completely separate, highly secured system. The goal is to make it harder and less rewarding for attackers targeting the core grid infrastructure.
That makes sense. Raise the cost and lower the reward for attacking the operational parts. But the grid, like many critical systems, is highly interconnected. The sources stress that the weakest link problem is huge here. One vulnerable component could be an entry point to attack others.
Absolutely. It's a classic network security problem amplified in critical infrastructure. And the sources point out that standard attack methods are still very effective. Man in the middle, as we discussed, and network replay attacks, capturing legitimate commands and resending them later. But there's a particular challenge with the specialized devices used in industrial control systems or process control networks, PCNs. These are things like PLCs, programmable logic controllers, RTUs, remote terminal units, IEDs, intelligent electronic devices. The embedded computers actually controlling physical processes like power flow or machinery.
Right, these aren't standard Windows or Linux servers. Why are they harder to defend?
Their entire security posture is often baked in by the manufacturer. They're designed for extreme reliability and real-time performance in harsh environments, often with very long operational lifespans. Security updates aren't like patching your laptop. Critically, as the sources note, the end users, the utility companies operating the grid, often have no way to install their own security software on these devices. There's no standard mechanism to put antivirus, intrusion detection, or even logging agents onto a PLC or RTU from various vendors.
So the security is whatever the manufacturer provided when it was built, maybe with occasional firmware updates from them if you're lucky. And those updates might require taking things offline.
Often, yes. It's a very static security model, heavily reliant on the vendor. This makes these devices potentially vulnerable for long periods if flaws are discovered, and they become prime targets for attackers looking for a foothold into the control network.
Which sets the stage for the really sophisticated malware the sources discuss: Stuxnet, Flame, Gauss. These weren't just simple viruses.
Not at all. These were complex, multi-stage cyber weapons exhibiting incredible sophistication, designed for persistence, espionage, and, in Stuxnet's case, physical disruption. Let's focus on Stuxnet, as the sources give some striking details. Just its size was remarkable. The main executable file was around 500 kilobytes.
Okay, 500K. How does that compare?
At the time, typical malware might have been 10, maybe 15 kilobytes. Even the infamous configure worm, which was considered complex, was only about 35 kilobytes. Stuxnet was enormous for malware, and it wasn't bloated. It was packed with code, multiple exploit modules, complex logic for targeting specific Siemens industrial control systems, code for hiding itself, rootkits, encrypted payloads, routines for spreading via USB drives, and network shares. It was incredibly dense.
That sheer size and complexity points to a massive development effort. Huge resources, likely nation-state level. And the sources mention how the attackers showed their resolve through tactical changes.
Yes, comparing the 2009 and 2010 versions shows a real escalation. Initially, Stuxnet spread partly using the standard Windows auto-run feature when a USB drive was inserted, relatively common, if effective. But around March 2010, the attackers made a significant change. They incorporated a much more powerful spreading mechanism, a zero-day exploit targeting a vulnerability in how Windows handled LNK shortcut file.
A 0 day, meaning a vulnerability unknown to Microsoft and the security community at the time.
Exactly. And using a 0 day just for spreading the malware rather than saving it for the final attack phase on the target systems was a very aggressive move.
Why was switching from auto-run to this LNK 0 day such a big deal tactically?
Speed and stealth, initially, but mainly speed. The LNK vulnerability allowed Stuxnet to spread automatically across networks just by browsing a shared folder containing the malicious file, no user interaction needed beyond opening the folder. This dramatically increased its propagation speed within target organizations. However, zero-day exploits are incredibly valuable and rare commodities. They represent significant intelligence gathering and development effort. Burning one on propagation, where it's much more likely to be discovered by antivirus companies or researchers,
means you risk exposing your expensive tool and potentially the whole operation much earlier.
Precisely. It significantly increased the risk of detection and analysis, which is exactly what happened. Eventually, it spread beyond its intended targets and was discovered. The fact that the attackers chose to use this high-risk, high-cost zero-day for distribution suggests they felt immense time pressure or had already invested so much huge sunk costs that they prioritized mission success and speed above long-term stealth. It signals a very high level of commitment and resolve.
Okay. That paints a picture of highly motivated, well-resourced adversaries playing a long game.
Definitely.
So let's try to wrap this all up. We've covered a huge amount in this deep dive. We started with the basics, looking at how even established modes like CBC have practical issues, like error extension, and how attacks like man-in-the-middle target trust, not just math, requiring defenses like PKI.
And then we moved into the really advanced stuff, secure multi-party computation. We saw how primitives like XOR-based secret sharing and Oblivious Transfer are the building blocks that let us compute on secrets, enabling secure collaboration in ways we couldn't before.
Right. Then we looked at the practicalities of deployment, the crucial security differences between link-by-link and end-to-end encryption architectures, and the absolute need for truly random numbers generated by systems constantly pulling in real-world entropy to resist prediction and compromise.
And we saw how all this plays out in complex systems like the smart grid, where seemingly innocuous data holds privacy risks, and where specialized embedded devices create unique security challenges due to their reliance on manufacturer security and lack of user-level defenses.
Tying it all together, the complexity is staggering. From single-bit errors in CBC to the architectural vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure, security often hinges on system design, deployment choices, and trust frameworks, not just the strength of the core algorithms.
Absolutely. And the threat landscape is evolving dramatically, as shown by the Stuxnet example, attackers demonstrating massive resource investment, strategic planning, and a willingness to burn valuable assets like 0 days to achieve their objectives. They are showing significant resolve through sunk costs.
Yeah. Which leads us to a really tough closing thought. Building on that idea of attacker resolve and the need for prior espionage that the sources mention for complex attacks. If sophisticated cyber operations are signaling commitment through sunk costs, and if major disruptive campaigns often need long-term spying first to even understand the target, how do organizations, especially in critical sectors, effectively balance the very real, ongoing cost of robust, preemptive cyber defense against the potentially catastrophic but uncertain cost of these highly complex anticipated future attacks? It feels like an almost impossible calculation, budgeting for defense against threats that are incredibly advanced and whose timing is unknown.
It's the perpetual balancing act, isn't it? Investing enough to deter or withstand without knowing exactly what's coming or when. A fundamental challenge in cybersecurity today.
Indeed. Well, thank you for guiding us through this incredibly complex and important domain. That was our deep dive into advanced cryptographic primitives, secure collaboration, and the systemic challenges of cybersecurity. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.